Well, hello again, everyone. This is Mitchell Moat, an extension agent here with the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension Program in Rutherford County, bringing you episode number 5 of the Grassmaster's Lawn Care Notes. I thought I'd like to spend a few minutes with you today on the topic of fall weed control. Now, before we get into talking specifically about fall weed control, let's talk just a few minutes about why fall weed control might be necessary. You know, so many folks in the late summertime, early fall time period will often do some either total renovation work on their home lawns, or they'll do some overseeding to clean up or to improve the population, the stand density of tall fescues that may have been thinned out due to some of the heat and drought stresses or disease pressure throughout the summer. Well, here at Lane Agri Park, what you're seeing pictured on this slide is an example of a renovation. This is a renovation demonstration that we started here at Lane Agri Park, just to give homeowners an idea of the process they might go through if they wanted to totally renovate a section or an entire home lawn. This area was growing in a good population of common Bermuda grass. And what we wanted to do was to take out the common Bermuda grass, or at least try to take out the common Bermuda grass, and establish it into tall fescue. So we went through our recommended renovation procedure. We treated the area with a non-selective herbicide. In this case, it was glyphosate, on the 24th day of August. And as glyphosate does, being a non-selective, it has activity against both grasses as well as broadleaves. And you can see it did a pretty good job of killing off at least the top portions of this Bermuda grass. Now, I would say that there was a spot or two there that we had to go back and retreat again, simply because probably did not get real good coverage on it the first time. So went through there and killed this area off, because the idea was we didn't want any common Bermuda grass. We wanted to establish some turf type tall fescue. So then on the 17th day of September, we went in here with 3 different implements, just to and the idea was to demonstrate the results of overseeding with these 3 different kinds of implements. And these are the kinds of things that a homeowner might find, or at least have available to them to use in renovation projects there in their home lawn. But the first one that we used over here was a combination aerator and seeder. The aerator consists of a series of spikes, if you would, or starred shape solid tine wheels on the front of the machine, and there behind it is a seed box, and as the spike aerator portion of the machine punches holes into the turf area, then it comes along and drops those seed into the ground behind them. And then here the second one we used was a core aerator, just the pull type core aerator that so many homeowners have available to them. They're available for purchase at home improvement stores. And the idea is that as you pull the aerator across the ground, it's a hollow tine aerator, and as those tines enter the ground, they pull out plugs of soil and deposit those plugs on top of the ground. So you're creating lots of openings in the soil, which makes good places for those seed to lodge in when you do your seeding. And it's important to have good contact with, or seed contact with, the soil in order to improve germination. And the last tool that we used over here on the far right was a springtime dethatcher. That's another very common tool that homeowners have available. Again, they can be purchased at garden centers, at box stores. And it's called a springtime dethatcher because the tines are spring steel, and the way they're situated there on the tool itself, you can adjust how deeply those tines contact the surface of the soil. And as the dethatcher is pulled across the ground with your lawn tractor, it pulls up the thatch or dead material that may be deposited on the surface of the ground, but also scratches the soil surface, so it cultivates that to a certain extent. But we used all 3 of those in this aeration and this renovation demonstration. And so after the ground had been prepared using the core aerator and the springtime dethatcher, then came back and sowed those seed with just a drop type spreader there. And you can see the strips outlined, or the different plots outlined there by the red flags. So on the 25th day of September, after seeding on the 17th, we've got a fair amount of germination that's already apparent. You can see it back here towards the back of the plot more plainly, where we have a little more open ground, open space area. You can't see it quite so well up here in the front, but I promise you there is germination taking place there. So September was a good month. You know, a lot of folks took advantage of September for overseeding and for renovation. Temperatures were really good. The moisture, just a natural moisture, was good. Had good rainfall. And so September, for a change, was a really good month for overseeding and renovating tall fescue here in Murfreesboro area. And then on the 13th day of October, we look out there and we can see some significant progress. And you can see that in all three of these strips here that we had good germination, and all three of those renovation techniques, this being the combination aerator seeder here on the far left, the one in the center was the seeding following core aerification of this plot, and then the one over here on the far right was seeding following cultivation via springtime dethatcher. So we've got lots of good growth progress here on the 13th day of October. You know, that's just a little bit less than a month from the time the seeds were planted there on the 17th of September. And then here on the 19th of November, or excuse me, the 13th of November, you can see some excellent progress is taking place. Good growth here, development, and you can see by the tracks that these plots have been mowed several times. I would point out that the lighter green grass color here in between the plots, that's with just some perennial ryegrass that we planted in there along about the middle part of October, just to help cover the ground up some and maybe hold down some weed growth throughout the summer. So what's the point of talking about weed control when we've done such a good job here on renovation? Well, we start looking into those strips of tall fescue, we can see a fair population of some of these winter annual broadleaf weeds that have germinated into that tall fescue. And the reason that we so often see that after a renovation project or some overseeding in cool season turf is that all of these winter annual weeds are called annuals because they have to germinate from seed every year. And all of the annuals are very prolific seed producers. They produce a good seed crop every season when allowed to make a seed, and they deposit those seed into the soil. So they make a deposit into the soil seed bank. And just the process of cultivating the soil, doing those things to improve your turf grass germination may also encourage some germination of those winter annual weeds. So typically when we do renovation work in turf type or in the cool season grasses like turf type tall fescue in that late summer, early fall time frame, we also can encourage some development or some germination of these winter annual broadleaves, and that's why weed control can become a concern for us, or at least there'll be a need for weed control in the fall of the year. So let's talk about what some of the different weed species are that we typically see in these fall renovated tall fescue lawns. The first one we'll take a look at here is common chickweed. You can see the common chickweed. It's got a fairly smooth leaf surface. By smooth, I mean it's not hairy. It's kind of slick if you feel of it. Kind of not a super dark green color, pale green, very prolific. If it's got enough space, it will grow out wide and form a mat, but produces white flowers, and then those white flowers then lead the seed that just keep this whole process going. Another common one that we have out here is another chickweed, but it's not common chickweed. It's called mouse-ear chickweed, and it varies or differs from the common chickweed because these leaves on the mouse-ear chickweed are not smooth. They are hairy. They're kind of a soft leaf, got a soft hairy coating over them, and I assume it's called mouse-ear chickweed because it may be reminiscent of the way a mouse's ear would feel with that soft hair-like coating over it. But anyway, mouse-ear chickweed is another one of those winter weeds that is a very prolific seed producer and germinates during those same conditions that favor the germination of your turf-type tall fescue. Another common one that's out there right now is henbit. You know, henbit is one of the purple or pink flowering weeds, and you can see in this picture. I mean, this was here in the early part of November. It's already starting to form those little flower buds. You can see the pink and purple little flower buds there, just getting ready to open up. If we allow them to go ahead and don't do anything and allow them to go ahead and reproduce, they're just making more seed to put into the ground for next year's crop. Another one that's very common right now, this one makes a white flower. It's called hairy bittercress. It grows from a rosette in the ground. It kind of spreads out there and puts this stalk up, starts making flowers, and then it produces seed pods, kind of an inch or so long, little narrow, thin seed pod. And when those pods get mature, those seeds get ripe, when something touches those pods, disturbs them, they'll explode and shoot those seed out across the ground to keep that population going out there. And then the last one we'll take a look at is it's not an annual like the previous ones, but it's wild garlic. A lot of folks will refer to it as wild onion, but it's technically, I guess, wild garlic. It's a perennial cool season weed that grows back from those onion bulbs or the garlic bulbs that are in the ground every year. And you know, the fall and the spring is when they're going to be most aggressive in their above ground growth. So are there options? Are there things that we can do since we've gone to all the trouble to renovate or overseed tall fescue and to thicken up and improve that population? What can we do at this point in time to cut down on the population of those weeds and do it now so that we're not going to let those weeds grow throughout the rest of the fall on through the winter and have all the opportunity in the world to reproduce and to produce more seed for them to put back in the ground next spring? Well, we do have herbicide options that are available that will provide some just pretty good control on all of these weed species that we've looked at so far this morning. The first one I'll mention is a 3-way or 4-way product. Those are typically provide the broadest spectrum of control. They're called 3-way or 4-way because they have 3 or 4 different active ingredients in them. And that combination of ingredients will provide the greatest efficacy against a lot of different weed species. Typically, you're going to see combinations of either 3 or 4 ingredients such as 2,4-D, dicamba, MCPP, MCPA, carfentrazone, and maybe a few others along the way. You know, an example of one that's been around for a long time, this is a brand called Trimet. Actually, this is Trimet Classic. Trimet Classic is a combination of the 2,4-D, dicamba, and let's see, MCPP. 2,4-D dicamba and MCPP. Again, broad spectrum on a lot of these weed species. It has activity against all of the weed species that we've looked at up to this point. Now, one thing that you run into in the fall of the year, you do have some cooler temperatures. And some of the older herbicide products, we need temperatures to be up in the 60s with good sunshiny weather when we make application to those weeds in order for the herbicide to do a better job of controlling it. And the idea being that when the weeds are more photosynthetically active, which they would be on a sunny day, and the temperatures are relatively mild in that 60-odd degree range, then they're probably doing more aggressive growth, and that more aggressive growth leads to them taking in more of the herbicide, which will provide a better control. But in the last several years, there have been some improvements made, and some herbicide products will have better cool weather performance than some of the older ones did. And here's an example of one that's called Weed Beater Ultra. It's got pretty good cool weather performance, and by cool weather, we're talking, you know, in the upper 50s down even into the high 40s, assuming that we've got good sunshiny days. Sunshine is critical because that does make the weeds more photosynthetically active, and the more actively they are from a photosynthesis standpoint, again, like I said earlier, the better they take in the herbicide product. This Weed Beater Ultra, it is a 4-way product. It has some MCPA, some MCPP, some dicamba, and some carfentrazone. And that carfentrazone ingredient that's added to it is the one that probably gives it that better cool season weed control. But the point is, there are herbicide options for you out there. And, you know, again, these are brands. We're just looking for those combinations of the 2,4-D, the MCPP, the MCPA, the dicamba, the carfentrazone, things like that, that will provide good control on so many of these winter weeds that we have out there right now. Now, a couple of other, or at least one other weed that is also out there now, it's an annual as well, but it is not a broadleaf. This is a grass weed, and you can see annual bluegrass seedlings that are highlighted here or denoted by the red arrows. Annual bluegrass is probably the most prolific, the most common winter annual grass weed that we have in turf grass in home lawns here in Middle Tennessee. And it germinates again during that same time period that our desirable turf grasses, when we plant those, when they germinate, in the same time period that those winter annual broadleaf weeds germinate. You know, this shot was taken here in the early part of October, and we can see a fair amount of development already taking place on these little winter annual bluegrass plants. Now, what why is that a concern? Well, the concern is they're very prolific seed producers, and if you have a fair population of annual bluegrass out here in your tall fescue lawn, as we see pictured here, they're going to grow throughout the fall, throughout the wintertime, and they're going to produce seed, a lot of seed. And those seed, you know, everywhere you've got these annual bluegrass plants growing, you don't have room for desirable grasses like your tall fescue to grow. They're taking up space, and they're going to produce a lot of seed that are going to help produce, make sure that there's another crop of annual bluegrass that comes back next year. But also, when this annual bluegrass dies, we've dug a clump of it up here so you can kind of see a little more detail on it. But when those grass plants die later on in the next spring, then you're going to have dead areas out there in what was previously, you know, a pretty uniform green grass covered area. But now you've got annual bluegrass dying out there, and some folks will look at that and say, oh shoot, I must have brown patch and tall fescue. But no, it's just that annual bluegrass dying. So what can we do to minimize those populations of annual bluegrass? From a homeowner standpoint, you don't have an awful lot of options once that grass is up and growing. Probably your best shot would be to use an herbicide that has the active ingredient mesotrione. An example of a brand is one called Tenacity. It's a single ingredient herbicide only. The only active ingredient in Tenacity is the mesotrione. And I would say that, you know, it's necessary to treat the annual bluegrass while it's young. You don't want to let it go ahead and start producing seed, because even at best, probably fair control is going to be the best level of control that you'll get with Tenacity. And fair control puts it somewhere in that, 60 to 70, maybe 75% control range. So it's important that you treat annual bluegrass in these cool season grasses, or even in warm season grasses as far as that goes, while it's still young and before it has a chance to start producing those seeds. But Tenacity, or a product that contains the active ingredient mesotrione, is an option that homeowners do have available to them to help provide at least some level of control for annual bluegrass. The final one we'll take a look at is another grass weed, but this is a perennial grassy weed. And a lot of folks will see patches of a more yellow-green or a lighter green colored grass growing out here in their tall fescue in the cool months of the year. And when you look at it a little bit closer, you'll notice that it's much finer textured than the tall fescue is. It has more narrow leaf blade. This is something that's called a Poa trivialis, or rough bluegrass, or rough stalk bluegrass. Again, this is a perennial. It's a bluegrass species that spreads by stolons above ground, and it'll grow in cool places. It'll grow in shady places, in areas maybe that don't favor the tall fescue growth quite so well, but it'll also grow out in full sun areas also. So it's very well adapted. But the point is, when you've got populations of this bluegrass, again, it's taking up space that would otherwise be occupied by the desirable tall fescue, and so in the fact that it creeps, whereas tall fescue doesn't, gives it an opportunity to expand over time. And so what started off as a small patch this year tends to get bigger as time goes by. So what are your control options from a homeowner standpoint for dealing with patches of this Poa trivialis, this rough bluegrass that you may have out there? Well, in all honesty, you don't have a lot of, back up here, in all honesty, you don't have a lot of choices. From an herbicide standpoint, probably your best option is to use a non-selective product such as glyphosate and just kill those patches of the rough bluegrass that you have out there. Then if it's early enough in the season, early enough in the fall, say if it's early October when you do that, then come back and reseed those areas you killed with desirable turf-type tall fescue, or cut those areas out. You can spray them out with some glyphosate and then cut those dead areas out, and then replace those dead areas with patches of sod that are similar to the turf-type tall fescue that you're already growing. But from a selective standpoint, there's not much in the way of selective herbicides available for homeowners to use to combat this rough stalk bluegrass that also would not have efficacy against your desirable turf-type tall fescue. Well, that's about all that I've got for you today, folks. You know, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of these very common winter annual weeds that we see popping up in the fall of the year after we've gone through the trouble and the expense of doing renovation work or overseeding tall fescue. And just to help you understand that there are things that you can do to control those weeds now. We don't have to wait till they start producing flowers and reproducing and making more seed next year. But if we can break that cycle up now and stop them from producing seed, then we can start to maybe lessen the amount of seed in the soil seed bank that is there for future weed growth. Now, this is not something we're going to fix overnight. It's going to be a long-term process, but you've got to start somewhere if the idea is to have a relatively weed-free tall fescue lawn here in Tennessee. As I said, this is all I've got for you today. If you do have a question about anything that I've talked about or any other topics pertaining to home lawns and gardens and landscapes, etc., give me a call here at the Extension office at 898-7710 or send an email to mmote1@utk.edu. And with that being said, folks, that's all I've got for you. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you'll tune in again. But I hope you found this information useful, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.